Did you know Africa was almost one single country? Not 55 passports, not dozens of borders, one united Africa. This week, powerful leaders gathered in Nairobi for the Africa Forward Summit. But after more than 140 years since colonial powers carved up Africa in Berlin, has the country truly become free? To understand today's African summits, you first have to understand colonialism. In 1884, European powers met during the Berlin Conference and divided Africa among themselves without a single African leader present. Borders were drawn artificially, communities were separated, resources were extracted for foreign empires. Even after independence, many African economies remained dependent on outside powers. That is why, after independence in the 1950s and 60s, African leaders began pushing for unity. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah believed Africa could only become powerful if it acted together politically and economically. In 1963, African states created the Organization of African Unity, which later evolved into the African Union. The dream was simple: Africans solving African problems together. Today, summits like the Africa Forward Summit bring together presidents, ministers, investors, activists, innovators, and global institutions to discuss trade, technology, security, climate change, and Africa's future in the global economy. But behind the speeches and diplomatic handshakes lies another critical issue: money and influence. Because if Africa wants full independence, the next question becomes, who is actually funding Africa's institutions and shaping its decisions? Imagine a building whose electricity bills are paid by the neighbors. The security is funded by outsiders. Even the building itself was constructed by someone else. Now, imagine the people inside claiming they are fully independent. That, in many ways, is the story of the African Union. More than 60% of the African Union's programs are funded by foreign donors. Around 58% to 67% of its total budget has come from international partners and donors. Its headquarters in Addis Ababa was built and financed by China. Many African peace missions have depended heavily on funding from the European Union and other external powers. So, the question is, if outsiders finance the institution, how much power do Africans truly have over Africa's biggest political organization? The African Union was officially launched in 2002, replacing the Organization of African Unity. Its mission sounded powerful: unite Africa, protect sovereignty, strengthen economies, prevent conflicts, and give Africans one collective voice on the global stage. But from the very beginning, the AU faced one major problem: money. Many African states regularly failed to fully pay their membership contributions. As a result, the institution increasingly relied on external partners to survive. Critics argue this dependency weakens Africa's independence because institutions funded by outsiders can also be influenced by them. Supporters, however, say international partnerships are necessary in a globalized world and point to AU reforms like the proposed 0.2% import levy aimed at reducing foreign dependence, though implementation has been slow and many countries have struggled to fully commit to the plan. So here is the uncomfortable question Africa must confront: can an institution truly claim full independence when much of its survival depends on outsiders? And if Africa wants genuine political and economic sovereignty, should the first step be learning how to fully fund its own vision? 1 out of every 4 humans on Earth could be African by 2050. With Africa's population projected to reach around 2.5 billion people, potentially rivaling or surpassing the populations of India and China, whose populations are expected to be around 1.6 billion and 1.3 billion respectively. But while Africa is becoming the future center of humanity, millions of young Africans today remain unemployed, disconnected, and watching opportunities leave the continent every single day. The African Union says Agenda 2063 will transform Africa into a global superpower. But the real question is, will Africa's youth become the engine of the next global revolution or the center of the next economic crisis? Agenda 2063 is the African Union's 50-year master plan for the continent's future. Its vision is to build a united, industrialized, connected, and economically independent Africa. At the center of this vision is the African Continental Free Trade Area known as AfCFTA. The goal is to remove trade barriers between African countries and create one massive continental market. Right now, it is often easier for African countries to trade with Europe or Asia than with each other. Border restrictions, taxes, and weak infrastructure continue to slow continental trade. AfCFTA hopes to change that by making it easier for businesses, creators, and industries across Africa to operate as one market. The AU also envisions high-speed rail networks, digital economies, modern industries, and visa-free movement across the continent. For millions of young Africans, this is about more than economy. It's about survival, opportunity, and dignity. But while the vision sounds powerful, many Africans remain skeptical because despite decades of summits and promises, conflicts, coups, and corruption still dominates headlines. And that brings us to the biggest criticism facing the African Union today. Over 200 coups and attempted coups have shaken Africa since independence. From military takeovers in the Sahel to violent power struggles that continue to destabilize entire nations. At the same time, billions of dollars are lost every year through corruption, illicit financial flows, and failed governance, while millions of Africans still struggle with unemployment, insecurity, and poverty. Yet, private jets continue landing at luxury summits where leaders gather to promise African solutions to African problems. So, here's the uncomfortable question. Are these summits truly rescuing Africa, or are they simply helping the political class maintain power while ordinary citizens continue paying the price? Supporters of the African Union argue that the organization has achieved major victories. The former Organization of African Unity played a role in ending colonial rule and apartheid in South Africa. AU peacekeeping missions have intervened in conflict zones, and the organization has helped Africa negotiate as a bloc on issues like climate change and trade. But critics say the AU often reacts too slow to authoritarianism, election disputes, military coups, and human rights abuses. For many young Africans, frustration is growing. They see repeated declarations and expensive summits, while unemployment, insecurity, corruption, and rising living costs continue affecting ordinary citizens. That is why some critics label the AU a talking shop, a place where leaders make speeches while implementation remains weak. Still, others argue that institutions alone cannot transform Africa. Citizens themselves must shape leadership, accountability, and governance. Because in today's world, Africa is no longer just fighting internal battles. The entire world is now competing for influence across the continent, and that may define Africa's next chapter. The batteries powering electric cars, artificial intelligence, smartphones, and the future global economy all depends on minerals buried beneath African soil. Africa holds most of the world's cobalt, massive lithium reserves, and some of the planet's most strategic resources. That's why China, United States, Russia, Europe, and Gulf powers are racing into Africa like never before. But here's the dangerous question. Will this century finally make Africans rich from African wealth, or will the world once again build empires while Africa watches from the sidelines? Africa's resources are now central to the future of technology, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, and global energy systems. From cobalt in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to lithium in Zimbabwe and oil across multiple African states, the world increasingly depends on Africa. That dependence has triggered a new scramble for influence. China is investing heavily in infrastructure. United States is expanding trade and military partnerships. Russia is increasing security ties in several African countries. European nations are pursuing energy and migration agreements. At the center of all this diplomacy stands the African Union and continental summits like the Africa Forward Summit. For the first time in decades, Africa has leverage. The world needs Africa's markets, minerals, labor force, and strategic position. But history still casts a long shadow. Many Africans fear the continent could once again become a battlefield for foreign interests, this time though economics, debt, technology, and strategic influence instead of direct colonial rule. That is why the real question facing Africa today is bigger than politics. Will Africa remain 55 fragmented economies competing against each other, or become one united force capable of shaping the future of the world itself? Hamza Abdi, Sauti Updates.